Today we have the pleasure of hosting the remarkable guest who brings an impressive combination of legal expertise and passion for auction-style fantasy football teams. You guys can catch him as the host of the Auction Brief podcast. Joining us is none other than Mr. Drew Davenport. Drew, it is awesome having you here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your outrageous schedule to be with us, man. How you doing tonight?
Hey, no problem. I always love an invite. I love talking to people that I've never talked to before, so it's really fun to meet you guys. And hey, this is what we're here for, right? This is what we live for. This is the 6 weeks of the year that it's our time to shine. Of course, the regular season is a different story, but it is great to be here. Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. I mean, you're talking to a Packers fan. We got a Browns fan and a Raiders fan. This is our season right now. Well, I'm newly coming in, so I don't want to take everyone's
Exactly. You don't
pride.
get to be the whole like I'm miserable all the time guy yet.
Yeah, you gotta wait another 15 years for that.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know that Greg Dulcich was going to be interviewing me.
I'll take that. Hey, I'll take that. It's better than Jason Momoa or Steven Adams, but I'll take Dulcich. That's not a problem. But no, you said it. Training camps are on the way, which means fantasy football is here. So we're going to pick Drew's brain about a couple player outlooks, some teams and new situations, what players to keep an eye on, some to stay away from. Gentlemen, are we ready to dive in a little bit?
Absolutely. First of all, Drew, thanks again for coming on. You're the man. And Steven and you guys just had a bonding moment with your records behind you. So mojo's high going into this. So thanks again, Drew.
There you go. The mojo's rising. Come on, you missed that. It was
I
right
feel
there
it.
in front of you.
I feel it.
So we want to dive in with his legal expertise first. Wide receiver from Minnesota Vikings, Mr. Jordan Addison, got arrested here, going 140 miles per hour. And it came out a couple days later that the reason behind that was because of a medical emergency of a sick dog that was in the car. I saw you kind of tweeting out over the last few days about that, kind of chuckling, having some side stories. With your experience in the legal criminal defense, you have to have some funny stories that are somewhat relatable to this, right?
I do. I have a million of them. Of course, I can't talk about current clients, but I tell you, right out of law school, I had a guy who got pulled over for a DUI and then told the officer that he could do the moonwalk instead of walking the line. He could do the moonwalk instead. So I got a million stories. But as it relates to this, Addison's excuse is pretty interesting because, like I said, I was very clear on Twitter. I'm not calling this guy a liar. Maybe there was a problem. I'm not sure that anything justifies driving 140 on a public roadway, though, because you're not a race car driver. You don't know how to handle a car at high speeds. I don't think okay, you're driving 90, you're whatever. I would consider something a little bit less to be more reasonable. I also want a quick point of clarification. When I hear the term arrested, I want to just be clear. He was not arrested. He was cited and released. And there is a difference because last year, Marquise Brown, when he got his ticket for 126 and a 65, he was actually arrested. And the reason it came back to matter was he ended up pleading to something, and then they fined him, and then they forgave the fine because of the incarceration time. But that also plays into a little bit about what the trooper thought about Addison when he had the contact with him. Because if Addison had been a jerk or had been, somebody that he felt was it was necessary to arrest him, that would have said a little bit more about the seriousness of the crime to actually put him in jail.
So that's actually kind of an indicator that the officer could have potentially thought that this was true, or that he had at least a sensible reason to try to go faster than normal.
Yes, and the joke I made was, hey, look, if I had $1 for every time somebody told me they had an emergency when they shouldn't have been driving or they were committing a traffic offense, I'd be retired already. And this happens a lot. I get cases, so a large part of my docket, maybe half of my docket, I do misdemeanor work in Ohio. And about half of my docket is driving cases. So either DUI or hit and run or driving without a license. And you'd be surprised how often I hear they got a charge for driving without a license and they say, I was just fixing the brakes and I had to drive it around the corner to test it. Or I fixed the spark plugs. I had to start it up and move it out of the driveway. And it's like, wow, there are so many do-it-yourself mechanics in this town. Holy cow. So, but at a certain point that they're just making it up. I don't know if Addison's making it up. I'm not saying that. Certainly not going to open myself up to a defamation claim. But like, let's wait. Let's wait until we know a little bit more. But you're absolutely right to infer that maybe the officer at the scene thought the guy was trustworthy, thought he wasn't. Maybe it wasn't necessary to arrest him because it is a charge that carries up to maximum 90 days in jail. So he had the right to arrest him if he wanted to.
Well,
That's
all right.
crazy.
Well, I'll jump in here because you are an auction draft specialist. And that's a lot of people at home, at least our listeners, that might be new like myself. So I want to ask you an auction draft question for a newbie, someone who's not done this before. And I guess should my advice or the advice be to me to go after the very high end talent and try to fill in after, or are you more of a make your team really deep and ignore the Patrick Mahomes and the Tyreek Hills and stuff like that of the world?
So I found that my best builds come when I ignore the top 1 to 3 guys at the position. So typically, I'm not going to have Christian McCaffrey. I'm not going to have Austin Eckler. I'm not going to have Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. I don't like my builds when that happens. Now, I will say that I believe there's a sliding scale. So the smaller the league is, the more you should go stars and scrubs. So the more you should be sinking the money into the top level guys. So I will try to differentiate a little bit when I get to the smaller leagues. And I mean by differentiate, I mean it is a big deal to have Travis Kelce in a 10-teamer, and it's a big deal to have a Jalen Hurts in a 10-teamer versus a 14-teamer. I'm really going to try to make a flatter build, make my team deeper. So I feel like I walked all around it there, but if you're straight up the middle and you're in a 12-team league, I think what you want to do is you really want to focus on tiers like 2 and 3. So you want to be looking at guys like A.J. Brown, Tony Pollard, those guys in that range right there. That's who I want to target as my number 1. And if I don't land them, then I'm going to really crush tier 3 for 2 or 3 guys. So, and that's what I like to do is go at wide receiver real heavy, and I want to end up with 3 guys that may be all first 3 round picks. So guys like maybe even C.D. Lamb might sneak into there for a value, but your A.J. Browns, your the guys that are going in that range, your Jalen Waddle, stuff like that. I want to get 3 of those guys, and that's really where I'm going hard. And then I'm kind of dump out of RB2 and spend my money on 1 good running back from tier 2 or 3, and just crush wide receiver.
I like it.
And that's perfect for the question I had. With the state of the running backs right now, who are really your most trustworthy guys maybe in that RB2 position that you're looking at? For somebody who, last year in an auction draft, I'm an idiot, blew my load on 2 running backs to start off the draft, and I basically got screwed the rest of it. But what are your strategies usually looking like around that, especially with this year at running back?
Yeah, so at running back, it's hard to say like who do I feel like is safe, because that is a really loaded question because the position is so volatile. I will say that right at the top of the draft board, Bijan Robinson, I always go for youth at running back, no matter what. And that's a tiebreaker for me. So Bijan Robinson, although I'm not a guy who really loves, and I'm sorry, I think I'm stepping on your show sheet here, but Bijan Robinson's not a guy who I really think to myself, hey, this guy's got RB1 written all over him as far as like top of the position. But I do feel safe with him because of the volume and because of the offensive line and because of how young he is. So that's the kind of thing that I like to do. I'm not really excited about, I know that like say Aaron Jones is a guy that is, people are feeling is like, okay, hey, he's a good value now because he's dropped a couple rounds, but he's 29. They may have an offense that takes a step back. I don't know if they will or not. Rodgers wasn't good for part of the year last year with the thumb, and they had some difficulties, so maybe they'll be okay. But I feel like that you're asking for there to be so many hurdles to overcome for him to succeed that I'd rather not have that. So I'd be looking at a guy who's a little bit younger and who has the chance, like a Zach Charbonnet, is not somebody that's that exciting for people, but he's young. He's probably going to get 150 touches right out of the gate, and if he looks real good, maybe a lot of those are receptions, because I don't think that's Ken Walker's game. So that's the kind of thing I'm looking at.
That's awesome. You've just added somebody to my list of people to watch. Yes. But So kind of transitioning, still talking about running backs a little bit. I'm thinking about Anthony Richardson to the Colts this year. How does that affect somebody like Jonathan Taylor? Like, what should we expect from him? What should we expect from Michael Pittman Jr. now that you're seeing a rookie quarterback who uses his legs a lot to make plays come into the Colts system?
It's frustrating because Michael Pittman was really set up to take a step forward, and I don't think that's going to happen this year. My frustration is in large part too because of the what happened with Josh Allen. Like, I think this is going to be on my headstone. Like, it was an outlier. Like, it's just, Josh Allen is a living outlier. Guys don't come into the NFL with a 55% completion percentage and suddenly make these huge leaps. He had a fantastic coach and a fantastic situation that they created for him. That's not normal. And Anthony Richardson would be another outlier if he suddenly were to come into the NFL and start completing 65% of his passes. That's not been his game. Having said that, he's got this freakish athletic upside that I understand that I think the offense can be reasonably decent, but I don't know that it's going to be any better than it was under Matt Ryan or the weird quarterbacks they threw in last year. So I have a problem with Pittman where he's going. Every time it comes to me in a draft, I can't click the button. I just can't. I just feel like 800 yards is right where he's going to be. And I looked at our Football Guys projections before coming on just to see if I'm way off base there. And that's right where most of them are, 850 to 900. So that just feels like you're going to run him out there every week for a 4 for 51 and just be like, okay, I can't cut him. He's Michael Pittman. And then he just clogs your roster. And so I'm out on Pittman. As far as Taylor's concerned, I haven't found a lot of reason to draft him only because of where he's going. In auction drafts, it's been nice if he ends up in the upper 30s, I'm taking him because that's a nice number. But for Snake, you really have to get him at the beginning of 2, and I'm just not that excited right there at the beginning of 2 for him. I don't think he's going to be terrible. I think his efficiency as a runner is going to go up because of Richardson as a threat. But then I think that could come with the downside of the touchdowns that he might lose. And that really propelled his value a lot 2 years ago when he became the consensus overall was the touchdowns. I don't know that we're going to see 18 touchdowns again. So I'm concerned about the entire offense just taking a step back or being mediocre like they were last year. Just haven't found a lot of reason to draft a lot of them except Anthony Richardson and Superflex.
So keeping that, I know you mentioned like the essential drop off of QB play and Michael Pittman nowhere to go or nowhere to take that step forward. In a similar, I guess, line of questioning in terms of receivers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have, 2, arguably 3 elite, great receivers that no longer have Tom Brady throwing the football to them and no longer have, a Jameis Winston who will throw into triple coverage to Mike Evans to him. So where do you expect, or how do you expect the Tom Brady leaving to affect that wide receiver core, and where do you anticipate drafting some of those receivers in fantasy?
Yeah, so I hate to go back to the auction well again, but I'm going to say, a weird thing happens when we sit here and stare at this stuff for 3 months. It's like, okay, well, they're not going to have Brady, so we got to move him down. And then we sit there and we stare at him. We're like, Baker Mayfield, did you see that throw? He sucks. And then, he's down a little bit more. And then, all they got there is Kyle Trask in the back. Okay. And then all of a sudden we're like triple and quadruple counting all these problems. And I feel like it pushes them down too far. Now, right now, Godwin's going as wide receiver 25 and Evans is wide receiver 32. I think that's fairly appropriately priced. Evans is too low, in my opinion, but I wouldn't argue with it. And what I've been saying, like I just said about the Colts offense, was that I get in an auction, and the other night I got Evans for $10. Now that's fantastic because the other receivers that have his pedigree are $15 to $20. I love that, but I don't see that happening in a Snake. He's not falling far enough for me to care. There's just other guys around him that I feel like have more upside. But I also feel like the hate goes too far on these type of guys where we just keep going bang, bang, bang. And there's really been nothing to say bang, bang 5 times. It's been, okay, he's got these 2 problems, but that's why he is where he is. So I can't argue with the price.
I mean, like we've seen DeAndre Hopkins when he had no quarterbacks in Houston. Like he's still like the players are still going to produce if you're at a certain level. So and like Mike Evans, what I think he's 2 years shy of Jerry Rice's record to start a career of 1,000 yards. I mean that'd be insane. So I kind of like that a lot. But I want to keep with wide receivers for a second. Our listenership is very much Ohio and Pennsylvania, so we have a lot of strong feelings about Ohio State, good or bad. 3 wide receivers in the last 2 years, first round. So I want to play almost like a game with you. Roster, bench, and cut. Of the 3, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, how would you go into this season with those 3?
Just for redraft, not dynasty.
I would honestly, if you want to give me a little of both, I'd love it. I'm a redraft guy, but I'd like to hear both.
Well, I'm a redraft guy myself, but I will say for dynasty, I like it completely flips it for me. So I love Smith and Jigba for dynasty, but I don't. So Garrett Wilson's my guy for this year. I'd take him first, Olave second, and Smith and Jigba is just kind of off my draft board because he just isn't falling far enough. And I shouldn't say he's off. Like, of course I'd take him if he fell, but everybody seems to believe that he's going to earn this big role. That could be, but I just don't see Tyler Lockett stepping aside. And on top of that, the Seahawks would just have to change their offensive identity to suddenly be an 11 personnel team. I don't know that they're going to do that. Now, if they do, then he's set up to smash, and then I'm going to look dumb. But I don't know if that's what's going to happen. Pete Carroll loves running the football. They took a running back in the second round because they still want to run the football. So for 23, I'm pretty much out on Smith and Jigba at his price. Love Garrett Wilson. Obviously, he just got nicked up today. That's a bummer. He twisted an ankle today. So assuming he's okay, he's still my number 1. Olave, I don't think he's as slam dunk as everyone seems to think. My only concern is what Derek Carr is going to see.
I felt it. You're hurting me. You're hurting me, Drew. I'm in love with it. I'm a Raiders fan that was like on him. So like
Okay.
I knew that was where it was gonna go, but all right, I'm fine. I'm recovered. I'm sorry, Drew. Please continue.
Well, and it's not that I think that the Saints' offense is going to be terrible. I think he's going to be an improvement for the offense. So let me say that. But I don't know that it's necessarily going to be just, hey, automatically, let's give Olave this number 1 role. Now, if Michael Thomas is healthy and he's playing, I think the 2 of them are going to be closer than people really want to believe. And the round separation there is massive. So I'm just not ready to buy in Olave as like having this massive breakout year. Having said that, I really like the player, and I'm willing to take the risk for what he showed last year. So I'm fine with where he's going, but Wilson's my guy.
I mean, Olave with putting up those numbers in a rookie year with Andy Dalton, I feel primarily like definitely has to speak volumes. But yeah, Michael Thomas essentially being back. That will almost lead me to this question: who is a player who's overhyped or maybe historically productive that this year you're like, you know what, I'm staying away from? I've made that same mistake the last 4 years on Travis Kelce, so how can I not make that this year?
Well, I'm almost in the same boat with Derrick Henry because I've been fading him now, and I just feel like the player, everybody says he's different. He's different. I get it. I get the argument. I understand, but he is at that age cliff. He's well past the age cliff and touch cliff. So if he's different, okay, great. Maybe that was last year. But we can't ignore the fact that his efficiency stats went down last year. And his points per game, I think, dropped by like 3, almost 4 points a game, even when he was in there. So I'm staying away from Derrick Henry. But that's kind of a layup. There's a lot of people. That's not an interesting opinion. I'm going to pick another guy that maybe will be surprising. I'm not a fan of Devontae Smith for this year. I like the player. I think that Jalen Hurts has room to improve. But if you look at the splits with Smith and Goddard on the field together, it's not pretty for Devontae Smith. So Dallas Goedert got hurt in week 10. From week 11 on, oh no, I had Devontae Smith up here and I dropped it. Oh, here we go. So this makes for great listening. I understand that. So...
Hey,
you're
not the first person to do that on here.
So from weeks 11 to 16, he absolutely crushed. He's got a 5 for 102 and a touch. He's got a 5 for 126, an 8 for 113 and 2 touches. This is all with Dallas Goedert out of the lineup. I just feel like we're asking for too much where he's going. He is still the number 2 guy, and sometimes he's the number 3 option in the passing game. Now they add a pass catching back in DeAndre Swift, and they still have Kenny Gainwell. I'm just concerned about Smith's price tag. It's not the player, it's the price.
So
I like that. Oh, so David, go ahead. My bad.
no, I was just gonna transition a little bit, but so keeping on the same idea of like maybe what people aren't thinking about, what are some of some of your sleeper picks going into the year, picks that you're going to be taking in the later rounds or with your last couple picks in the draft?
So if we're going late, a guy that I was on, I promise you, I've got 10% exposure to Richie James out there in Kansas City. So that may be a little bit high. I'm not comfortable with that. I'd rather have him around 5%. But, he's sitting there in round 22 every time, or round 20. And I'm just like, somebody there is going to do something out of the slot. And it sounds to me like he's the guy who's supposed to do that. I don't know. So Richie James is a guy I'm throwing a dart at. I'm also throwing a dart at Donovan Peoples-Jones because everybody talks about Tillman or they talk about Elijah Moore. But I believe that Peoples-Jones if you look at what he did last year, if they hadn't added Elijah Moore, more people would be talking about Peoples-Jones' profile from last year. He didn't score a lot of touchdowns, but the guy was going out every week and producing. That to me says breakout. I don't know what you want to see if you look at that season and think to yourself, he's not a factor this year. He's not going to step aside. So I don't know. Maybe they're going to run 3 wide, and there's going to be room for Moore and Peoples-Jones. But where I can get Peoples-Jones, it's a no-brainer. I've been clicking that button probably a little bit too much. But another guy that I'm really on later is Gerald Everett. Again, he was productive last year. I understand they had injuries to the wideouts, but they're really going to push the ball down the field this year. And they've got 2 guys. Now, they had Jalen Guyton get hurt last year. He's coming back. He's a field stretcher. They got Quentin Johnston now. I think that Gerald Everett's going to make hay in the middle of the field, and I love the new offense. So I think he's going way too cheap at tight end.
I think you earned yourself at least 15 new Browns fans just from mentioning DPJ.
Yeah, people like the Elijah Moore trade, but now everyone's like, but it's DPJ season. If you ever ask the Cleveland Brown, every single game is about to be the DPJ game. So, no, you may have gained like 20 or 30 just because of that comment. But if you had to put all the chips in the middle of the table here, who is the guy that is making the biggest leap this year that no matter what, I guess outside of a price range, that you're like, I'm going to go up to X amount of dollars and make sure I get this guy because that's how much trust I have in him?
Boy, that's tough because I'm not a guy that drafts really aggressively like that on young players. But I will say that the excitement that the Detroit Lions have for Jahmyr Gibbs is interesting to me. I've never been a guy who says, okay, give me this 199-pound guy who profiles as a 40-catch, running back just because he's got draft capital. But the more I think about it, the more I think that they just had something in DeAndre Swift that they didn't like. There was something about him. I don't know if it was the durability, if he didn't play through little nicks like Dan Campbell wants to eat your kneecaps. Like maybe that he just wasn't the guy for Dan Campbell. And maybe they see Jahmyr Gibbs as the guy. So I that's one guy that I'm picking. I know he's a rookie, but there was another guy that I was looking at earlier that I wanted to mention too. And again, this is great. This is great stuff here that I'm lingering. So Christian Kirk is a guy that I'm planting my flag on him for this year. I understand that Calvin Ridley is a good player, but I really think that Trevor Lawrence is about to explode. So maybe my pick should be Trevor Lawrence. But let's just say I'm all in on the entire Jaguars offense. I think they're all going to take a step forward. And I think that people fading ETN, the guy was so efficient last year with not very many carries. I'm not sure what more you want to see. I know they didn't feed him a bunch of catches, but that's never been his game. So the entire Jaguars offense, I feel like, is ready to just go nuclear this year.
All right, well, I'm going to throw one name at you because we gained all those Browns fans for. I'm about to take some of them away just because I can. George Pickens. Is he going to blow up the way Pittsburgh media out here seems to feel like he's going to.
No.
All right,
Okay, so
never
I'm a
mind.
Steelers
Cleveland
fan.
loves you.
I'm a Steelers fan, man, and I'm not a Pickens guy. I'm not a Pickett guy either. I don't think that Kenny Pickett is the answer. I think he's a limited quarterback. I'm probably going to get crushed for this, but he only had a 1.9% TD rate last year, so that's really low. That's bizarrely low. That's going to go up. Most quarterbacks that throw as much as he did and the offense scores the number of touchdowns they did, he's going to have a certain percentage of those. Now, when I say the number of touchdowns they did, they were tied for second to last in the NFL in total offensive touchdowns, I believe. And I'm pulling that off the top of my head. I didn't look that up again today, but they were really bad on offense last year. But even so, the opportunity should have been there for Pickett to look a little bit better. As a result, I'm concerned about him overall. I'm concerned that they've got limited play calling ability there. I don't love the offensive coordinator. And there's some guys I listen to in the dynasty community that just think that Pickens is a limited player. And that all the highlight reel catches just really prove that he can't get separation, and that's the only way that he's going to be able to make his living. Kind of Mike Williams-esque a little bit, but that's a slander to Mike Williams. I think he's a great player. So I'm not in on Pickens. That's not my guy. So I've got 0%.
I love it.
Could
I
be
love
looking
that.
bad, but
Well,
Made
and
my
I'm
whole
not-
week.
I was going to say, the Cleveland fans are going to love it. My Pittsburgh buddies out here might not talk to me anymore, but I'll get through it. Now, the last thing I've got for you, and it'll be quick, just because it is because of what happened earlier today. To those that are listening, next week, we're recording on the 27th. Joe Burrow, 3 or 4 hours ago, goes down in training camp. And I'm going to keep this light. We're fantasy guys. Does this not just it's like a public service announcement? Why do people draft this time of year? Can you explain to people at home why it's stupid to be drafting in July in the first and second week of August?
for your home leagues, absolutely. I don't know why you'd want to be doing that. But in general, like all these industry leagues and stuff, like I have to, I have a ton of drafts under my. I've got a lot of best ball drafts done, and I've got quite a few more auctions this summer than I've had in the past. The good news is none of them are really like my top level like drafts that I'm super concerned about. So most people don't want to be drafting right now. So my first big time one is going to be King's Classic coming up here the second weekend of August.
Okay.
So hopefully we have made it through the spate of injuries here, the soft tissue stuff that's going to pop up. But the Burrow thing, it's brutal.
Yeah. Thankfully, it sounds like a calf strain. Let's keep our fingers crossed for Cincinnati out there.
We got Joe Burrow, Jalen Ramsey going down with knee surgery that he's going to miss this next 6 to 8 weeks on. Garrett Wilson that you said that was rolling the ankle, so it's tough. NFL is truly back. We see the cards coming out, and everyone is freaking pulling their hair out right now.
It's brutal. And I was looking at that Dolphins defense the other day. Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard, and then they get Vic Fangio. That's going to be nasty. Ramsey, at a position that demands the change of pace and the quickness, the short area quickness, full meniscus repair. He might not be himself till middle of the season. So I don't know. That's a rough one.
And that's what we were talking about. At least they have like a late November bye week too. So if they come back a little bit, then he gets another extra week. That can only be a positive. And he's got that Miami Heat. He's a youngster.
Youngster-ish at corner. Old man.
That is true. Drew, we're going to let you get out of here for the night. Remember, everyone, you can catch Drew Davenport on his podcast, the host of The Auction Brief. Before we do say our farewell, Drew, we're going to give you some time here. Why don't you let our audience know where they can connect with you, they can follow you, or read some of the articles?
Thank you. Yeah, my baby is the Auction Brief podcast. So that's what I started a couple summers ago, and it's a unique show. I know that a lot of people like to say that, but I tried to create something because of this saturated space. So I do legal takes, and we talk a little bit about life and life lessons, things like that. But then we also do some auction stuff, and then I have a guest on every week where we do player analysis. So I try to hit the whole spectrum there. So the Auction Brief can be found anywhere you listen to podcasts. And we don't always just talk auctions. So anybody, it's a general fantasy show as well. We do plenty of fantasy analysis. And I like to think we do a little bit more theory on the show than most shows do. So we don't just talk players. We talk, how do we succeed playing the game better than other people too. And then the other thing that I'm really working hard at this summer, I just started a Patreon channel about a month ago. Patreon.com/fantasyfootballlawyer. And so I've taken some of my threads to behind the paywall, but it is a massive 12 quarters a month. So yeah, $3 whole every month. But I just decided that I was spending a ton of time chasing down dockets, writing these threads. I mean, believe it or not, writing a 20-tweet thread, the research that goes into chasing a docket, looking at the statutes, making sure I have the right statutes, the right sentencing statutes, looking at evidence on the internet, all this stuff. A 20-tweet thread can sometimes take me 3 or 4 hours. And so I just said, hey, look, I got to monetize this somehow. It's not going to make me rich, but just, a little bit of money for the time I spend into it. So that's patreon.com/fantasyfootballlawyer. And anytime I have a thought or take on anything legal, it goes right up there. And then there's a ton of interviews with analysts across the industry about their favorite players, auction content, all kinds of stuff over there. And that's about it. My writing's over at footballguys.com, and 4for4, I'm doing an article series over there as well. But I think that's it. See me in the expo. If you're coming to the expo, come say hi, please.
There we go. Yeah, and if anyone out there, the LOD listeners, make sure to go listen to Drew if you want to. I know our podcast kind of dumbs you guys down a little bit. Want to get educated, head over to Drew Davenport. But once again, Drew, thank you for your time to come on LOD. It was absolute pleasure to be able to have you on here. Hopefully we can get you back on in the future. Until then, take care, and hopefully we get a couple more of those championship belts behind you after this year, right?
Yeah, baby.
Hey, last word. Can you give me a Super Bowl champion this year?
Ooh.
Oh, gosh.
I'm putting you on the spot, Drew.
That is putting me on the spot. Well, I tell you what, I know there's the Super Bowl hangover, but the Eagles look pissed. They look ready to go. I think they felt like they should have won the Super Bowl, and I think they're going to be on a revenge tour. Again, that's a layup, but give me the Eagles.
Love it.
Hey, nothing wrong with that.
Love it.
You're the man, Drew. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me.